Hey guys, tonight we're crawling into a Mongolian yurt, the kind that creaks softly in the wind and smells like wood smoke and a little bit of sweaty history. The felt walls hug in the heat, the night sky hums outside, and your feet are already a little damp from stepping across sheep-worn grass. In here, light filters through a smoke hole in the roof, casting drowsy shadows across fur blankets and curved wooden beams. The air is thick, quiet, alive. You're about to enter a world without running water plumbing or spa days, and somehow people survived. Though, to be honest, if you could smell what I smell right now, you probably wouldn't. That's the point. You came here for boring history, and history's rarely smell-proof. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The door to the yurt swings open on its rickety hinges, and in you go ducking just slightly to avoid the top frame the way nomads have for centuries. You brush past a leather flap, then blink into the dim interior. The whole space smells like time. Earthy, warm, dense. You don't see history in here, you breathe it. The yurt, or gyur in Mongolian, is a marvel of portability, a collapsible circular home made of felt wood ropes and a startling amount of cow hair. The felt is pressed sheep wool, thick and grayish, wrapped in layers, and tied with hand-spun ropes around a frame of slatted wood. Some gyurs even featured patches woven with horsehair or goat wool for added insulation, practical if a bit fragrant. You sit on a stiff mat near the stove, right where the host gestures. The mat smells faintly of sweat and milk. It's surprisingly cozy. The yurt breathes. Not metaphorically, like it literally breathes. The felt walls let air circulate in and out, filtering wind but holding heat. No glass windows, no metal latches. Just earth, wool, and human ingenuity. And here's your first cheeky hygiene lesson. When the walls breathe better than you do, you start to notice every smell. Mongolian nomads knew this. That's why the layout, the airflow, and even the materials used were deliberate, part function, part cultural choreography. Historians still argue whether the earliest yurts were designed purely for shelter, or if they always served as social filters too. Was the circular shape spiritual, spatially efficient, a smell containment strategy? Probably a bit of all three. That's the thing about ancient architecture. It rarely answers with a single voice. The dome ceiling arches above you like a rib cage, the center open to the sky. This opening, the tuno, is the only place smoke escapes. Beneath it, a small iron stove coughs up a curl of pale gray haze. That stove burns dried animal dung. Don't make that face. Dung was the most available renewable fuel on the steppes, and in a poetic twist, it's part of what gives the yurt its signature scent, hot wool, scorched grass, and digestive afterthoughts. You're not wearing a watch because time, like water, doesn't exactly flow the same way out here, but you feel the day shift outside. A breeze slips through the seams of the felt walls. The yurt responds. It tightens. Warmer now. You glance at the yurt poles and notice the seams where the wood slats curve into the base circle. Everything's tied together with horsehide straps or coarse string, no nails, no glue. This thing is fully disassemblable. You could take it down, pack it on a yak, and rebuild it in a few hours if you knew what you were doing. Of course you don't. but your host does. As you listen to their low rhythmic chatter and the sound of a ladle hitting a bowl, you begin to understand the yurt isn't just a shelter, it's a living system. Its materials carry the memory of herds of seasons of travel, and its structure is tuned to the rhythms of nomadic life, including the most underrated rhythm of all body odor. Cleanliness in the yurt world was less about being squeaky and more about being livable. It wasn't about eliminating scent, it was about managing it. Which corners were better ventilated? Which direction should the door face to catch the breeze and carry the stink away from the bed? Where do you hang that sweaty saddle blanket so it doesn't ruin your sleep? These weren't trivial questions. They were life choices. One quirky little detail: you notice a scrap of fabric tied near the top of the ceiling frame. Bright, almost ceremonial looking. It flaps slightly in the air current. That's not just decoration, it's probably a protective charm, possibly a relic of shamanic traditions. Or maybe it's just there to scare off flies. Historians still debate which. You shift on the mat and try not to think too hard about the fur throw beneath you. It's warm, slightly oily, definitely used. But this is your seat for the evening, and tonight it's teaching you what walls can say. Walls that hum when the wind presses against them. Walls that exhale when the fire flares. Walls that remember every meal, every breath, every guest. Sleep is still far off, but your eyes are adjusting to the dimness. You hear a goat bleat softly outside. The stove ticks as it settles. The air smells faintly like wool steeped in smoke. Welcome to the world of nomadic hygiene. We're just getting started. You're still sitting cross-legged on the felt mat when the yurt exhales again. The wind outside hisses through the grass, then bumps gently against the thick felt walls like it's asking to come in. It does. Sort of. Slowly, subtly, the inside temperature shifts. So does the smell. You're not sure whether your nostrils are adjusting or just giving up. Now that your senses have softened into the room, you begin to detect layers, yes, layers of scent. Smoke is the baseline, dry, persistent, with a faint tang of dung. But over that, you catch something oily, something warm and savory like old butter left in the sun too long. You sniff again. It's sheep fat, or yak butter, or both. There's also the unmistakable hum of human sweat. Not the lemony gym sweat of modern life, but a deeper, earthier musk. It's fermented, lived in, and almost intimate. This is the real aromatic profile of the Mongolian yurt. You glance around. There are no air fresheners, no incense, no emergency lavender sachet discreetly tucked under a pillow. Just wool, leather, fat fire, and bodies. And yet nobody seems to mind. Not even you, strangely. That's because here, smell isn't something to eliminate, it's something to interpret. You catch sight of your host's hands. Thick, weathered, permanently darkened in the creases from work. Their palms gleam slightly with oil, most likely animal-based. Probably from a recent meal or just a routine grease of the skin to keep it from cracking. In this dry climate, soap is rare. Lotion is unheard of. But fat is everywhere. On food, on hands, on tools, and by necessity, on faces. Historians still argue whether the extensive use of sheep and yak fat was primarily for skincare cooking or simple survival, but it probably wasn't optional. The stuff seeps into daily life both metaphorically and literally. The yurt's low ceiling traps heat efficiently, but it also traps odor. especially in winter. Imagine a family of 5 bundled in fur and sheepskin huddled together for days during a snowstorm. The fire smolders, burning slowly to preserve fuel. The door stays closed. The only opening is the smoke hole, and even that might be half covered in bad weather. You can see how this could get ripe. One traveler in the 19th century described the interior of a yurt as dense with grease and unwashed things. Another compared it to living inside a sausage. That one's kind of poetic. Actually, just don't think about it too hard before dinner. Still, it wasn't all bad. The same dense air that trapped scent also preserved warmth. And when you live on the move, luxury smells like not freezing to death. Nobody here's looking for eucalyptus, scented anything. They're looking for dry boots and food that hasn't spoiled. Priorities shift. You notice a shallow wooden bowl near the fire. It holds what looks like curdled milk, hard and flaky at the edges. That's arul, a dry dairy product made from soured milk. It's tart, crumbly, and teeth-rattlingly tough. Think of it as Mongolia's answer to the protein bar. It also smells like the wrong side of a cheese grater. And yet another layer in the scent symphony of the yurt. You lean back gently, trying not to knock anything over. The yurt isn't cluttered, but it's dense. Every item has a purpose. Bowls hang from rope loops. Saddles are stacked in a neat pile. Leather straps dangle from the central frame like dried vines. Somewhere behind you, a pot simmers, probably milk tea. The fat-rich kind, salty and almost broth-like. Again, functional hydration, not a Starbucks flavor shot. There's something oddly reassuring about all this. You begin to understand, Dawn, if you stop judging cleanliness by minty freshness and start measuring it by livability, the yurt starts making sense. This is a world built around preservation of food, of warmth, of energy. Fragrance. That's a modern luxury. One quirky fact, Mongolian nomads often preferred slightly sour milk products over fresh ones. Not because they liked their stomachs punished, but because fermented dairy kept longer and aided digestion. It also didn't require refrigeration, which is helpful when your nearest freezer is a glacier. Oh, and here's a tidbit to chew on, literally. Some nomads use dried milk curds as snacks and cleaning tools. Hard, brittle, and mildly abrasive old chunks of arul were sometimes rubbed along surfaces, or even teeth. Yes, you heard that right. Milk snacks and medieval Windex. Your modern kitchen sponge is looking a little overrated now, huh? You shift again subtly, not because you're uncomfortable, but because your legs are definitely asleep. Still, you don't want to move too quickly and stir up more scent than necessary. The air's in delicate balance now. The host offers you a small cup. It's warm. Steam curls from the top. You take a cautious sip. It's milk tea sute tsai. Salty, buttery, and far richer than you expected. It coats your throat like melted cheese water. But you keep sipping. It grows on you. Like everything here, it's an acquired taste. And like the scent of the yurt, it's oddly comforting once you stop resisting it. Above, the smoke from the stove spins lazily toward the tuno. The edges of the ceiling flicker with firelight. You swear you can still smell last week's dinner baked into the beams. Maybe even last year's. You know what's funny? The more you sit here, the more normal it all feels. The yurt's scent is no longer an assault. It's an environment, a story, a time capsule. You're not just surrounded by sheep fat and wood smoke. You're inhaling centuries of adaptation. And somewhere in all this thick, woolly air, you start to feel sleepy. You're starting to feel like part of the yurt now. Your body's gone soft and slow, like it's been steamed over low heat for hours. The warmth, the rhythm of the fire crackling, the way every sound in here seems to have a soft edge. But something still nags at the back of your mind, a modern instinct tugging at your comfort. Where's the bathroom? You don't want to be rude and ask, but it's gnawing at you. You've seen no sink, no soap, no designated washing area. Not even a water jug within reach. So how exactly did Mongolian nomads stay clean in a place with no plumbing, no hot showers, and no concept of spa day? You brace yourself. The answer is, they didn't. At least not the way you think they did. This is the bathless routine. See, in the traditional nomadic world, cleanliness was less about scrubbing and more about balancing. You didn't wash off your natural oils, you preserved them. You didn't sterilize your space, you coexisted with it. To strip down and soak yourself in water just for the sake of smelling like a meadow. That's not only impractical, it's downright wasteful when fresh water is scarce and horses drink more than you do. Historians still argue whether Mongol hygiene practices were shaped more by climate or culture. Was it the icy winters that discouraged bathing, or a philosophical stance that over-cleansing weakened the body's defenses? Likely both. But one thing's certain, a full body wash was rare, special, almost ceremonial. Instead, daily hygiene was modular, strategic. You'd clean your face with a damp cloth, rinse your hands maybe with leftover tea, wipe your feet with wool. For everything else, the mantra was, leave it alone and let the wind handle it. Honestly, that might work better than half the skincare influencers you follow. You look around. Everyone else seems perfectly at ease in their layers of wool and leather. No one smells like roses, sure, but no one's recoiling in horror either. That's because the standard is shared. No one's judging you by the absence of deodorant. You're all steeping in the same stew. Still, you can't help but wonder, when did they wash? The answer, occasionally. Strategically. Often in rivers or streams when available, but not daily, not even weekly. A full scrub might only happen during summer when water was more accessible and temperatures made stripping down slightly less deadly. In the meantime, they turned to other tricks. One of them, smoke. But we'll get to that later. First, let's talk body zones. You adjust your sitting posture, careful not to brush the fur edge of the saddle near your knee. That thing has seen things. In the nomadic hygiene hierarchy, certain parts of the body got way more attention than others. The face, of course. The hands, especially before handling food. The feet after travel. These were your priority zones. Everything else, tolerated. And this wasn't laziness, it was logic. When you're constantly on the move, battling dust storms and chasing your next water source, your cleaning budget is tight. So you triage. If your armpits are tolerable, your nose clean, and your hands milk tea ready, you're good to go. But let's be honest. They did get smelly. One foreign envoy in the 13th century described Mongol warriors as fierce, fast, and formidable until they removed their boots. According to him, it was like lifting the lid on centuries of suffering. Boots were worn for weeks, sometimes months without removal. The result, a kind of foot funk that probably counted as biological warfare. You chuckle a little at the image until you glance at your own socks and realize you're one bad decision away from joining the club. Here's a quirkier one for you. Some Mongolian groups believed washing too often, especially the hair, could actually damage the soul. Hair was a spiritual conductor, and over-cleansing it might strip away protective energy. Instead, hair was brushed perfumed with dried herbs or treated with yak butter. Yes, again with the butter. That rich, slightly sour fat wasn't just food. It was moisturizer shampoo and, if you had a long braid, styling gel. You picture a medieval Mongolian influencer. Hey guys, this week's hair routine includes a touch of wild thyme and 3 scoops of yak butter. Don't forget to braid. You smile, but the logic holds. Yak butter provided moisture in dry climates and kept hair pliable during long rides. Plus, it repelled lice. Well, sometimes. Kind of. Historians still debate whether butter actually helped keep lice away or just made them slipperier and harder to catch. Either way, you're scratching your scalp a little now, aren't you? Bathhouses, of course, existed elsewhere in cities and other empires. But for Mongolian nomads, there were no steamy tiled rooms with marble benches and scrubbing assistants. There was wind. There was sun. Occasionally there was a river, and most of the time there was just you and your felt-wrapped hut and your natural musk. And yet somehow they thrived, conquered half the world even. Which makes you wonder, maybe we've overthought the whole soap thing. The fire in the yurt spits out a tiny burst of embers. You watch them swirl like sparks off a memory. The smoke rises through the tonneau, curling upward out into the freezing dark. Your eyes sting slightly from the haze, but your skin feels warm. Cushioned. Not squeaky clean, but not bad either. You feel settled. Like a bowl of curdled milk, sour but secure. And you start to realize the bathless routine wasn't a failure of cleanliness. It was a redefinition of it, a system built around survival practicality and the quiet knowledge that you don't have to sparkle to be strong. You shift your legs, now gloriously numb. You sniff the collar of your borrowed robe. It smells like history, and somehow you're okay with that. The fire's gone low again, and your host leans over to nudge it with a piece of dung the size of a flattened tennis ball. It crumbles into the coals, sending up a sleepy plume of smoke. You're no longer surprised by anything in here. Not the smell, not the heat, not the total absence of plumbing. But one question still simmers in your mind like the tea kettle beside you. If they didn't bathe, what did they use to clean themselves? The answer comes in the form of a small, cracked wooden bowl placed quietly in front of you. Its contents look like an unfortunate culinary experiment, milky grainy with a faint odor of fireplace. This, believe it or not, is your first look at traditional Mongolian soap, except it's not really soap. It's mare's milk mixed with fireplace ash. Yeah. Let that settle. In the absence of lye-based soap, which was expensive, rare, and mostly imported, nomads had to get creative. Mare's milk was abundant. After all, a herd of horses meant not just transport, but a constant supply of milk that was used to make arag, a fermented drink with the consistency of yogurt and the mood of tequila. Add to that some fine ash from last night's dung fire, and you've got yourself a kind of gritty cleanser. Historians still argue whether this concoction was used to wash hands, hair, or household tools. The sources are vague, the practices varied, and honestly, you're not eager to find out firsthand. But one thing's certain, mare's milk was far more than just a beverage. It was survival juice, nutrient-rich, high in fat, and surprisingly versatile. Mix it with ash, and it becomes a frothy, slippery, slightly acidic paste, not unlike modern exfoliators, except, fermented. You try to imagine your bathroom shelf stocked with charcoal ash and horse milk scrub, TM. Not exactly marketable, but undeniably effective in a pinch. Your host picks up the bowl and dabs a bit onto a cloth. They rub their hands together gently like they're warming them. You notice the subtle foaming, the way the grayish liquid clings, then beads. It doesn't smell great. It doesn't look great. But their hands come away slightly less dusty than before. This was hygiene on the step ritual, repetitive and utterly indifferent to your spa day expectations. Another method, smoke cleansing. Not incense, not sage. Just plain pungent smoke. The dung fire you've been silently judging this entire time wasn't just for warmth or cooking. It also served as a kind of full-body fumigator. Stand above it long enough and the smoke would cling to your clothes, your hair, your skin. It masked odors, killed lice supposedly, and acted as a microbial deterrent. You weren't so much clean as you were smoke-cured. Think of it like becoming jerky, but majestic. One traveler from the 18th century remarked that Mongol warriors had a peculiar scent of scorched air and fermented milk, which somehow feels oddly poetic. It's like a signature, one part battlefield, one part barn. You shuffle your feet slightly, the mat below you creaking like old leather. The yurt is quiet now, save for the steady hiss of the fire. Your host is combing their hair, slow, methodical strokes with a bone comb. Their braid is thick, glossy, and coated with something. You're guessing yak butter. Again, you've noticed by now that everything seems to come back to animals. Cow hair in the felt, sheep fat in the food, horse milk in the soap. And yes, even the ashes you just saw, those came from dried animal dung. In this environment, nature wasn't a backdrop. It was a toolkit. Here's a lesser-known tidbit. Some nomads, especially during warmer months, used sandy soil as a dry scrub. A handful of fine grit rubbed over the body could lift off sweat and oil like a natural exfoliant. Pair that with wind exposure and the occasional splash of river water, and you've got a low-tech but surprisingly effective method of not smelling too unbearable. Modern scholars occasionally debate how effective these methods really were. Did smoke and ash and milk actually clean the body, or did they just delay the inevitable funk? There's no scientific consensus. But steppe life didn't leave room for luxury. It demanded adaptation. Your fingers brush a small leather pouch beside the stove. It's tied shut with a frayed cord, and when your host notices your curiosity, they nod. You open it slowly. Inside dried herbs, crushed juniper, bits of rhubarb root, maybe even some wild onion. It smells sharp and earthy, almost medicinal. These weren't just flavorings. In many cases, herbs were tucked into clothing or pouches as a kind of passive cleanser. Think of it as nomadic deodorant. No spray, no aluminum. Just stuff you picked while herding goats. Some even tucked herbs into their hats to combat lice and freshen the scalp. Functional and fashionable. You're tempted to try it next time you're stuck on a crowded train. You realize slowly that this entire lifestyle is an exercise in minimalist hygiene. No running water, no bathtubs, just improvisation ritual and a surprising amount of dairy. You lean back on your elbows, letting the warmth soak into your shoulders. The fire flickers again. The yurt walls breathe. Maybe you don't need lavender-scented everything. Maybe it's okay to smell like your surroundings. Maybe hygiene isn't about obliterating nature, it's about partnering with it. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to understand why that ash and milk bowl doesn't seem so strange anymore. Your eyes track the lazy path of smoke as it coils through the open circle in the ceiling. The air's grown thicker now, a little heavier with every passing hour. You blink slowly, your senses dulled just enough to stop caring about the strange film building behind your ears. You wonder almost dreamily, how did they deal with hair? Because if your own scalp is any indication, you're about 3 hours away from greasing up like a cast-iron skillet. Across from you, your host finishes rebraiding their hair, tight, methodical, like muscle memory passed down through generations. And that's when you notice something unusual. The braid ends in a loop tied with a small leather thong, and tucked beneath the loop is a smoothed sliver of bone. Probably not for decoration. Turns out Mongolian nomads didn't just treat hair as an accessory. It was a hygiene battleground. Let's address the obvious. There was no shampoo aisle on the step. No herbal rinse. No 2-in-1 conditioner promising maximum bounce. Hair care, like everything else, relied on what was available. Butter smoke and an unshakable tolerance for bugs. Historians still argue whether traditional Mongolian headgear was designed primarily for ceremonial reasons or to trap in scalp heat and block lice. The answer, as usual, is probably yes. Because everything here serves more than one purpose. You shuffle slightly to shift the weight off your ankle. That's when your host notices your gaze lingering a little too long on their braid. With a faint smile, they gesture toward a curved wooden box near the saddle rack. You crawl over, it creaks like it remembers Genghis himself, and open it slowly. Inside a trove of grooming relics, bone combs shaped like half-moons, narrow pins made of horn, even a few folded scraps of cloth stained with something reddish-brown. It's a hygiene kit, but minimalist. Elegant even. Everything in it looks like it's been used 1,000 times and will be used 1,000 more. Bone combs, you learn quickly, were indispensable, not just for neatness, but for lice. You feel your scalp itch involuntarily. These combs weren't delicate. They were fine-toothed weapons dragged methodically through dense hair to fish out tiny invaders. And they weren't always successful. Lice were common, inevitable even, but so were responses. Smoke was one method, as we've seen. Another was binding hair tightly in braids or knots and coating it with oil or fat to make it less hospitable. Hair wasn't washed often, maybe only a few times a year, but it was groomed constantly. Brushed, combed, maintained. You shift your attention to the headgear hanging near the doorway. Some of it is fur-lined, thick and elaborate. Some looks like upside-down baskets. These weren't random styles. Hats were a hygiene line of defense. Here's a fringe detail for you. It was believed by some that exposing one's scalp to the elements too often could attract evil spirits or illness. So men and women alike kept their heads covered, not just out of modesty, but to prevent what we might now call energy drafts. Not exactly an air conditioning problem, but close. This belief wove itself right into hygiene. If you shouldn't expose your head, you didn't wash it casually. You didn't flaunt loose hair. To unbraid someone's hair without permission, that could be offensive, intimate, akin to peeling off someone's protective skin, which means that even the combing you're witnessing is a private moment. You're being allowed to observe something deeply routine, yet quietly sacred. You lean back again, feeling your own scalp tighten slightly in the fire's heat. You're imagining your hair braided and tied with goat sinew scraped through with a bone comb slick with butter. Not sexy, but effective. The fire pops. Your host produces something else, a tiny ball of crushed herbs and clay. They rub it between their palms and apply it lightly to the scalp. It smells not terrible, kind of minty. You suspect it's some ancient flea deterrent or maybe a scalp soother. And here's the thing, nothing is ever just one purpose. That herb ball could also be used to perfume clothing, or chewed for fresh breath, or offered to the gods during spring festivals. Multi-purpose, recyclable, biodegradable. Your overpriced shampoo suddenly feels very underachieving. Another traveler's journal describes Mongol warriors massaging their scalps with fine dust and wiping it out with cloth. No rinsing, just friction and prayer. Think dry shampoo but grittier. Literally. So what do we call all of this low-tech grooming, step-chic survival aesthetics? Whatever name you give it, it worked well enough to keep a mobile population functioning, riding horseback for days, sleeping beside animals, fighting battles, and somehow still keeping their braids tight and their beards if they had them relatively groomed. Even facial hair had its place. Some Mongols favored light mustaches but avoided thick beards which were harder to manage. Others shaved the sides of their heads in crescent shapes, both for spiritual reasons, and, you suspect, to keep lice from having a scenic route. You notice a younger member of the household enter. Their hair is still wet, clearly washed. You raise an eyebrow. They grin and mime the shape of a stream. A bath rare, but not impossible. Likely a special occasion, or maybe they just felt adventurous today. Either way, it reminds you that nomadic life wasn't entirely static. Even rules had exceptions. You return your gaze to the roof, the smoke hole still blinking at the stars above. You imagine 1,000 heads of hair being combed under this very ceiling over centuries, some clean, some not so much, all part of the rhythm of yurt life. And you start to realize hygiene here isn't measured in scent or sparkle. It's measured in intention, in effort, in ritual. You don't need a shower to feel clean. Sometimes you just need a comb, a flame, and the patience to braid your way through the dust. The fire pulses gently now like a sleeping heartbeat. You've gone from visitor to fixture, folded into the rhythm of the yurt without even noticing. But as the smoke slows and the quiet deepens, another thought drifts to the surface. How did they handle seasons? Because let's be honest, cleaning yourself when it's 70 degrees and breezy is one thing. But when it's 30 outside and the river's a frozen death trap, that's not hygiene. That's a dare. This is where Mongolian nomadic hygiene takes its boldest shape. Welcome to seasonal filth management, or as you might call it, strategic stink planning. It starts with understanding the stakes. Winters in the steppe aren't just cold, they're existential. White-out blizzards, biting winds, and a kind of frost that doesn't feel like temperature anymore. It feels like a slow, creeping erasure. You don't just endure winter here, you brace for it. Which means no water, none. Rivers freeze, streams vanish. What little moisture remains clings to the edges of ice-crusted livestock troughs. The idea of stripping down for a wash hilarious. You'd die before you got your socks off. So the rule is simple, you don't. Historians still argue whether winter hygiene was a conscious sacrifice or just a byproduct of practicality. Did they choose not to bathe, or was it simply never up for discussion? The answer doesn't really matter because either way it led to the same result. A hygiene protocol adapted not to convenience or preference but to survival calculus. Here's how it worked. In the cold season, personal cleanliness was managed through insulation and layering. You wore the same undergarments, often made of fine felt or old linen, for weeks at a time. Outer layers were thick sheepskin coats, fur vests, yak wool cloaks. These didn't just keep you warm, they trapped your scent so it didn't spread. Think of it as containment more than elimination. The layers were rarely washed. Instead, they were brushed down with stiff horsehair tools or simply left out to freeze overnight. The theory: let the cold kill the microbes, or at least freeze them into submission. You raise your eyebrows, but then think of your own freezer. Doesn't exactly smell like roses, does it? Spring, though that was the time to reset. As ice melted and rivers flowed again, nomads seized the brief window to wash air out their yurts and cleanse their gear. Clothes were rinsed in the stream laid over rocks to dry. Hair was sometimes cut. Blankets were beaten clean with sticks or hung where wind could whip the dust out. One traveler described it like this: the steppes thawed, and with them the people also seemed to shed their skins. You shift slightly, imagining the first bath after 6 months of grime. You'd either cry from relief or recoil from the sheer volume of runoff. But not all seasons were so generous. Summer brought its own issues: heat-sweat flies and a surge in livestock-related odors. Without refrigeration, dairy spoiled faster. Meat turned. People perspired. And with no running water to splash on your face like in the movies, you had to improvise. One trick: dust bathing. Like birds or desert foxes, nomads sometimes rubbed dry earth onto their arms and legs, then brushed it off to lift away sweat and oils. It worked surprisingly well, plus it gave the illusion of effort. Another: fermented milk rinses. A watered-down version of Arag sour and slightly bubbly, used as a rinse-off, usually for hands and feet, but sometimes the scalp. It wasn't just about cleaning, it cooled you off and disguised stronger odors with milder, milky ones. Of course, autumn was the in-between season, the transitional time. Herds were moved, camps dismantled and reassembled. It was a season of motion. You didn't wash much, but you didn't stew either. Breezes returned. Sweat dried fast, and the layered clothes of winter hadn't returned to haunt you yet. Each season then brought its own hygiene rules. Winter trap and survive. Spring purge and cleanse. Summer mask and tolerate. Autumn move and balance. Modern hygiene sees cleanliness as a constant, a flat line of daily maintenance. But for Mongolian nomads, it was a cycle, a spiral, a conversation between body climate and movement. And it was full of compromise. For instance, during deep winter, waste management became a nightmare. You couldn't walk far to relieve yourself, the cold would win. So buckets were sometimes used inside the yurt. Covered, yes, but not sealed. The smell mixed with the ever-present scent of fire smoke and body heat. You didn't eliminate odor. You absorbed it, like family, like history. Your modern brain twitches at this, but your sleepy brain, it kind of gets it. You turn your face toward the felt wall. A tiny gap near the base lets in a thin breath of freezing air. You close your eyes and imagine months of darkness, your hair braided and unwashed, your boots never removed, your hands only brushed clean with powdered milk or ash. And still you keep living. You feed your family, you travel, you survive. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fragrant, but it worked. And more than that, it made sense. Every decision aligned with climate mobility and resource access. Nothing wasted. nothing done for show. Even now, some herders on the steppe maintain parts of this rhythm. They'll tell you bathing in the river is refreshing, yes, but it's not routine. It's timed. You wait for the right moment, the right weather, the right mood. Hygiene, like migration, is seasonal. You glance up at the smoke hole. A single star winks through it. Somewhere outside, a stream has begun to thaw. Somewhere not here. Not now. But it will come. The fire has burned down to embers now, just a low red glow nestled in the belly of the stove. It pulses softly, casting sleepy shadows across the yurt walls, which you've come to realize are doing a lot more than holding up the roof. They're organizing people. You shift slightly, mindful of your host's quiet, deliberate movements. Everyone seems to know exactly where they belong. A child curls up near the left wall. An elder sits upright by the door. The hearth remains sacred, centered, undisturbed. You weren't assigned a spot, but your body somehow knew not to lean against the west wall. And here's the strange thing, you're not imagining it. In a Mongolian yurt, where you sit matters almost as much as how you smell. Welcome to the subtle social choreography of yurt layout as social deodorant. It starts with orientation. A traditional yurt always opens south toward the sun, the warmth, the future. Inside the layout follows a logic so ingrained it becomes instinct. Men to the west, women to the east. Guests to the north. The family altar, if there is one, occupies the rear furthest from the door. The fire sits squarely in the center, dividing the space like a sacred axis. Historians still argue whether these spatial divisions arose from religious beliefs, clan customs, or sheer practicality. But what's clear is that this invisible grid wasn't just for spiritual balance. It helped manage the invisible fog of everyday smells, too. Picture it: one stove, one smoke hole, 5 to 10 humans, possibly a goat or two, and no Fabrizi. If you don't choreograph that space properly, things go feral fast. So families developed a kind of olfactory etiquette. People with stronger body odors, say the hard-working men who spent all day herding wrestling horses or chopping frozen dung, were seated closer to the entrance or the fire, where air moved more freely. The breeze could carry their scent outward or upward, away from the sleeping quarters. Those responsible for cooking, child-rearing, or caring for elders often sat on the side opposite the smoke's path. Not just because it was warmer, but because fewer smells lingered there. You think back to that subtle tug in your gut when you first entered. That unspoken instinct to sit where you did. Turns out that wasn't just you being polite, it was centuries of subconscious survival advice kicking in. One early European visitor noted that a yurt possessed the stench of livestock and manhood in equal measure, but observed that the scent faded near the altar. Coincidence? Hardly. Placement wasn't just about roles or respect, it was about airflow. And that airflow was everything. You glance up again at the circular opening, the tuno. It's not just a smoke vent. It's a pressure valve, a scent chimney, a cosmic compass. It draws hot air upward, creates circulation, and offers the only real path for odor to escape. Everything inside the yurt, from food prep to foot sweat, responds to that one hole in the ceiling. So if you wanted to keep your stench from overpowering the sacred altar, or the children's bedding, you sat accordingly. Not just tradition strategy. One quirky fact. Some jurs had a designated funk corner, a spot near the door where work boots, saddles, and other aromatic items were kept. The logic: Let the most fragrant objects huddle together far from the sleeping zones and close to the airflow. It's kind of like a middle school locker area, if the lockers were made of sheepskin and the students were herders who hadn't bathed since solstice. You laugh softly to yourself, and your breath fogs briefly in the cool air. This place, you realize, is a masterclass in passive scent control. No air purifiers, no sprays, just architecture etiquette and elemental airflow. Another small detail catches your eye. The stove sits slightly closer to one side of the circle. It's not perfectly centered. That's not a mistake. Some families intentionally shifted the stove's position to guide smoke and scent toward the tuner more effectively. The idea was to keep the air moving even without opening the door. Some even added tiny roof flaps they could adjust with strings. Pull one and a section of felt lifted slightly, creating just enough suction to vent out smells. Push it down and you sealed in the warmth. A medieval dimmer switch, but for stink. Of course it wasn't foolproof. During storms or on still nights like this one, the air thickened. Smells settled. That's when the layout mattered most. The child near the wall stirs. The elder by the door leans forward, tossing another dung disc into the stove. Everyone moves as if according to a script. You wonder how many thousands of families have done the exact same dance generation after generation without ever writing it down. You close your eyes briefly and imagine the space empty, then slowly filling with people. The smell of milk tea, the crackling fire, the saddle placed near the drafty seam, the man with thick boots near the door, the woman with the comb in the east corner, the elder facing the altar, each person in their place, not just for social reasons, but for scent logistics. And you realize with a kind of sleepy awe that this wasn't an accident. It was engineering. Cultural, spiritual, olfactory engineering. Your own world is filled with invisible rules. 2, don't sit too close to someone on the train. Don't reheat fish in the office. Microwave. Don't talk too loud on speakerphone. But here, the rules are built into the walls, and the walls are made of wool. It's sometime between now and tomorrow, and the fire crackles with the steady breath of a world that knows how to survive in stillness. You've accepted the air for what it is, thick, smoky, faintly sour. You've stopped wrinkling your nose at the fat, slicked bowls, the wool-heavy bedding, the walls that smell like every meal since last summer. You've adjusted. But just as your body slips toward that blissful, soot-scented sleep, a new sound nudges you back, a hiss, then a pop. The dung fire's not dying, it's being fed. But not for heat this time. Your host leans over the stove and tosses in a bundle of dried herbs wrapped with coarse twine. A sudden burst of smoke flares up sharper than before, medicinal, earthy, almost spicy. The scent swirls around the yurt like it has somewhere important to be. You just got invited to a nomad sauna, sort of. This is argal, a form of smoke cleansing still practiced today, and it tells a fascinating story about how hygiene, ritual, and relaxation all blur together in the Mongolian yurt. You're not stepping into a tiled steam room. There's no towel wrap, no piped-in flute music. But you are about to sweat, and that's the whole point. In a world without running water, steam and smoke became tools of purification, not substitutes, not second best. Just different solutions, ones that could travel with you. Historians still argue whether these smoke rituals were purely medicinal, spiritual, or hygienic. Were they meant to cleanse the body or the soul, the practical or the unseen? The answer again's yes. The bundle tossed into the fire often included juniper thyme and sometimes bits of dung itself. Yes, really. Because dried dung, when burned, doesn't just provide heat, it smolders low and long, producing the thick, steady smoke needed to fumigate both bodies and yurts. The entire household would lean in close to the stove, heads bowed, eyes stinging slightly, arms lifted, letting the smoke find the folds of their clothes, the creases of their armpits, the knots in their braids. Not exactly a eucalyptus facial, but it worked. You shuffle a little closer, mimicking the posture. The smoke curls up your sleeves into your collar. It doesn't burn, it clings. Your skin tingles, and there's a sudden rush of heat across your chest, like your pores just opened up and said, "All right, fine, let's do this." You feel steamy. In the cold seasons, this ritual served as a rare moment of warmth and cleansing. Not a bath, but a purge. Sweat wasn't a byproduct, it was the goal. You needed to move fluids to the surface, let the smoke enter, lift, and carry away what you couldn't scrub. One traveler in the 1700s described such a moment as a suffocating blessing. And yeah, that tracks. The nomads didn't stop there. After the smoke, the yurt might be left empty for a few minutes, doors open, letting the wind sweep through and carry the haze and whatever foul spirits or bad smells it had gathered out the other side. That simple act turned a smoky sit-down into a full-blown detox. Even tools and clothing were smoked. A warrior's armor hung near the fire. Baby blankets smoked to drive off insects. Saddles, boots, rope, everything got a turn. It wasn't a spa. It was sanitation. Here's a quirky detail for your trivia drawer. During certain ceremonies or seasonal transitions, entire yurts were dismantled and reassembled, not just for travel, but to air them out. The felt walls, once removed, were beaten with sticks, stretched in the wind, then smoked before being tied back together. Imagine spring cleaning, but with more fire and fewer Swiffers. Back inside, your host tosses another bundle into the stove. This time, the smoke has a faint sweetness, maybe some dried herbs from the summer stash. You catch hints of sage or wormwood, both used in traditional medicine for calming nerves and settling stomachs. So yes, technically you're inhaling pesticide, but the organic kind. You begin to sweat gently under your collar. The air presses close, thicker now, not just warm, but wet. Your skin prickles and your breath slows to match the rhythm of the embers. You're not just watching history anymore, you're breathing it in. It's not hard to imagine the emotional power of this ritual. Families gathered like this after long travels, before births, after deaths, during illness. The smoke wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. A restart, a clearing, a way to signal to the world and to your own lungs, something is changing now. Let's clean it out. Modern scholars debate whether argol was more effective as a hygienic tool or a psychological one. Could smoke truly purify, or was the belief in its power enough to carry the body through another bitter winter? Again, both. You pull your sleeves back slightly and hold your hands over the stove. Your fingers catch the rising warmth. Your cheeks glow. Your forehead beads. You're sweating in a yurt that has no plumbing, no vents, no porcelain tiles, just fire, herbs, and repetition. And it feels cleansing. No minty exfoliants. No spa playlist. Just steam smoke and silence. The child stirs again, curls deeper into a fur blanket. The elder hums softly a tune that seems to match the crackling fire. Your host leans back from the stove and exhales not dramatically, just at peace. And you realize this was their hygiene sanctuary. Not a room, but a moment. A state of being. Here the spa didn't come to you. You sat down, fed the fire, and let the air do the rest. You wake from something not quite sleep, not quite thought, as a low whoosh pushes past your ear. The stove flares briefly. Another chunk of dung lands in the fire, collapses into itself, and starts to smolder. The scent is familiar now. Almost comforting in that strange way some childhood smells cling to memory, wet pavement, warm bread gasoline. Here it's burning dung, and it's the lifeblood of the yurt. You stretch just enough to pop one shoulder and sit up straighter. The air is thick again, not just smoky, now saturated. There's heat in your hair. Your shirt clings slightly. The fabric of the yurt itself seems to hum with it. So here's your next revelation. Dung isn't just fuel. It's ventilation. Well, more like the enemy and the answer to the ventilation problem. Let's break this down gently because you're practically inhaling history right now. Mongolian nomads relied almost entirely on dried animal dung for fuel. Wood was scarce on the steppe. Trees are a luxury out here, rare and often reserved for tools, wheels, or bows. So they turned to what they had in abundance: livestock, and what livestock leaves behind. Sheep, goats, yaks, horses all contributed to the communal burn pile. The dung was gathered, dried in the sun until it became light and almost chalky, then stored in neat stacks or baskets inside or near the yurt. That's what's fueling the fire beside you, now perfectly aged goat poop. And it's probably cleaner than your kitchen sponge. Historians still argue whether dung was chosen purely out of necessity or if its slow, smoldering quality made it more desirable than other fuels. Some accounts suggest that, over time, nomads preferred it. Why? Because unlike wood, which flares up and cools quickly, dung burns low, and even producing steady warmth and, most crucially, a thick, slow-moving smoke. Which brings us to hygiene. Because the same smoke that's making your eyes water, it's sterilizing the air. Sort of. The logic goes like this: the yurt is sealed. Tight felt walls, a single smoke hole. One door. There is no drafty cross breeze here unless you make one. So that smoke, it doesn't just heat the space. It circulates. It clings to clothing. It seeps into wool. It drives away insects. It preserves dried meats hanging near the ceiling. It's like incense meets disinfectant meets thermal blanket. And yes, that includes your pores. People who lived in Gurs accepted that they couldn't scrub their skin daily. So instead, they sweat it out. They smoked it out. And sometimes, especially in winter, they just baked in it, letting the oily residue build up into a kind of self-made moisturizer/armor. You feel your own face now, a little sticky, a little tight, but strangely, not dirty. That's because the smoke doesn't just linger, it sinks. It replaces bacteria with particulates. Not ideal by modern standards, but in a world without sinks or soap dispensers, better than nothing. A lot better, actually. You lean closer to the stove and watch it work. The fire's center glows orange. Around it, white ash puffs up like spent snow. You can smell the earth in it, a musky, grassy undertone beneath the sharper tang of combustion. One quirky trick practiced by some nomads drying dung with aromatic herbs mixed in. Sage, thyme, even bits of dried rhubarb stalk. Why? because when burned, these added a hint of fragrant smoke with flair. Imagine a scented candle called horse campfire. It's niche, but hey, someone would buy it. Another little secret: the stove's pipe, if there is one, was often designed not to funnel all the smoke out. Just enough. The rest lingered deliberately. A kind of indoor fog of war against bacteria, against chill, and yes, against stink. Of course, the system wasn't perfect. On windless days, the air thickened to the point of soup. You could taste breakfast from last week. And if the dung wasn't dried properly, mold. Sickness. A sour chemical scent that clung to everything. So maintaining the right smoke, dry, clean, steady, became a crucial skill. You didn't just light a fire. You managed it. Every yurt had a person who knew exactly which type of dung to burn, how long to let it dry, where to stack it, and when to turn it. Fresh goat pellets, no. They smoked too fast and too acrid. But a well-aged yak patty chef's kiss. Slow, warm and clean. One elderly traveler wrote, "A dung fire tended properly sings." And now, as you listen to the low hiss of the coals beside you, you believe them. But it's not just about heat. The smoke affects everything: how food tastes, how people smell, how cloth wears. Over time, yurts develop a kind of signature scent. A blend of all the families who've lived there, all the meals cooked, the storms endured, the quiet nights like this one, sitting just like you are, breathing history. There's even a story, probably apocryphal, about a herder who identified a stolen blanket based on the scent of its yurt smoke. "This one's from the Onon Valley," he said. "Smells like dried mare's milk and wormwood smoke." Not ours. Crime Scene Investigation, Step Edition. Your cheeks flush now, not from embarrassment, but heat. The stove is working overtime, and your pores are responding. You wipe your brow on your sleeve and catch a whiff of yourself. Smoke, dung, sweat, felt. You are now officially part of the yurt. And you realize something even more surprising: you don't mind. You no longer crave citrus-scented body wash. You don't miss hot water. You've adjusted your expectations, your standards, your understanding of what clean even means. Clean isn't sterile. Clean is balanced, sustainable, integrated. Clean is when your fire doesn't choke you. Your clothes don't crawl and your blanket smells like home, even if home smells like burnt goat poop and yak butter. You close your eyes again. The yurt breathes. The fire smolders, and the smoke rises slow, sacred, and absolutely everywhere. The yurt is a little quieter now. The fire's breathing low and steady, and everyone has settled into that unmistakable middle-of-the-night stillness, somewhere between drowsy and dreamless. But as you shift under your blanket of wool and residual smoke, something scratches at your brain. They wore these clothes every day. You glance down at your sleeve, still slightly stiff, with fire-kissed dust and whatever was floating in the air hours ago. These garments, felted, layered, lived in, have been more than fashion. They've been your insulation, your filter, and surprisingly, your skincare routine. Welcome to Clothing as Skincare Mongolian Edition. Let's start with this. Mongolian nomads didn't wear clothes just to stay warm. They wore them to protect from wind dust, sun, snow, insects, and yes, from their own hygiene gaps. Because when you can't wash your body daily, you armor it instead. The average outfit. A multi-layered ensemble that looked more like mobile architecture than fashion. The base was often a soft cotton or linen underlayer if they could get it. Over that deal, the iconic robe wrapped tightly and secured with a wide sash. On top of that, fur vests, padded cloaks, leather boots, maybe a coat lined with sheepskin. And everything was layered for a reason. The outer layer caught the filth. The middle layer trapped warmth. The innermost layer that was your skin's only hope. And unlike modern laundry day, you didn't toss these into a washing machine. You rotated them, brushed them, smoked them, beat the dust out with sticks, or just let the wind take care of it. Historians still argue whether these garments were cleaned with regularity or simply worn until they disintegrated. Some accounts suggest that wealthier nomads had multiple sets rotating them by season. Others say a single deal might last years, patched, smoked, sun-dried, and proudly passed down. Maybe all of it's true. Maybe clothing was just as layered in narrative as it was in fabric. You shift a little, again brushing your fingers over the sleeve's edge. The fibers are coarse but strangely gentle, like someone tried to spin softness out of hardship. And here's the twist: these clothes didn't just shield the body, they managed it. Take sweat, for instance. These layers absorbed and wicked moisture, keeping your core dry. Wool, felt, and fur are surprisingly breathable when woven right. They didn't trap sweat against the skin, they channeled it outward, where it could dry in the wind or freeze off in a spectacularly unglamorous moment of steppe life. Even more fascinating, the clothes were strategically designed to filter out dust and microorganisms. High collars, overlapping seams, tight cuffs, everything was shaped to minimize exposure. Not because someone had a germ theory poster on the wall, but because centuries of exposure taught them what worked. And they took it seriously. You look across the yurt. A fur-lined hat hangs near the door. It's heavy, oversized, ridiculously warm, and it protected the scalp and ears from windburn, lice, and sun. Gloves weren't just for cold, they kept grime off your hands while you handled livestock. Boots were tall, sealed, and sometimes stuffed with herbs. Underwear. If it existed at all, it was wool and probably treated like a second skin, meaning never removed unless absolutely necessary. Here's a fringed tidbit for you: some nomads carried thin cloths or leather pads under their armpits inside their garments. Sweat catchers. Reusable. Smart. They'd remove them at night, air them out. Maybe dust them with ash or powdered root, then slide them back into place the next morning. A DIY antiperspirant? No aluminum required. Another oddity: decorative sashes and belts weren't always about style. They also compressed layers, preventing chafing, and in some cases helped with digestion or posture. Think medieval Spanx, but scented faintly like goat. And believe it or not, your clothing could also serve as a sponge. During summer, with sweat inevitable and rivers far apart, some herders let their sleeves absorb the moisture from their arms, then hung them to dry in the sun while wearing a backup pair. Sweat recycling. Not pretty, but effective. You run your hand over the seams again, marveling at how these people wore their hygiene. And that's what it really comes down to. Your clothes weren't just your outfit. They were your first, best, and sometimes only barrier between skin and steppe. Even after death, this philosophy held. Bodies were often buried in their deals, tightly wrapped with layers of cloth soaked in herbs or resin to mask decay. The clothing didn't just accompany them in life, it followed them into the afterlife, and modern echoes still exist. Travel to the steppe today, and you'll still see herders in layered deals, felt boots, fur hats, not out of nostalgia, but because these materials still work. They still breathe filter wick and insulate better than most synthetics. They still smell right. They still carry the past in every stitch. You think of your closet back home filled with fabric that brags about moisture wicking and odor blocking and antimicrobial panels. And yet, here you are, feeling cleaner than expected in a robe that probably predates your entire street. You lie back, let your head rest against the rolled edge of a saddle blanket, and stare up at the central ring of the yurt, the tonneau still framing a slice of star-pierced night. Smoke curls upward. Wool stretches across the beams like ancient breath. Your skin is sticky, your clothes are heavy, your nose is slightly offended, and yet you feel protected, wrapped, filtered, clean in a way you never expected. The air is cooler now. The stove pulses with a deep, gentle breath. Less flame, more ember. Around you, the others have fully dissolved into sleep. One soft snore, one shifting elbow, one slow exhale into sheepskin. You lie still, but your mind wanders again back to one of the earliest questions you had when you stepped into this felt-wrapped world. What about water? Because let's face it, you've seen no spigots, no sinks, no shimmering tubs of clean, warm wash water, and yet somehow people washed. Kind of. This is where things get interesting: water access and washing hierarchy. In modern life, we act like water is infinite. You flush it, pour it, waste it while brushing your teeth. But on the steppe, water was precious. It didn't just appear when you turned a knob. You found it protected. It sometimes fought over it, and when you had it, you used it carefully. Here's how it usually went. Water was gathered from the nearest available source. A stream, a well, a melted patch of seasonal ice. Often this meant walking a distance, sometimes long, sometimes uphill. Both ways and in the snow. Yes, really. Once collected, it was hauled in skins buckets or whatever vessels you could strap to a yak. And then when it got to the yurt, it had to last. Washing was ranked, not in a snobby way, in a strategic way. First priority, drinking, always. Hydration wasn't optional when you're herding livestock or riding across a semi-frozen plain. Second, cooking. Water was needed for milk, tea-boiling meat, or making doughy dumplings with unpronounceable but delicious names. Third, the animals. A thirsty horse is a useless horse, and you don't want to ride a useless horse anywhere. After that, maybe you got to clean yourself, but only a little. You'd start with your face. A small splash in the morning, maybe a cloth dipped and wrung out. Eyes, mouth, nose, anything exposed to wind and dust got first priority. After that, your hands, especially before meals. Not out of some formal dinner etiquette, but because people ate with their hands. So, if you're grabbing a dumpling, it better not taste like goat hooves. Historians still argue whether this prioritization was universal, or varied by tribe or class. Some reports suggest wealthier nomads had designated hand-washing bowls shared among family members. Others describe cloths used communally rinsed and reused, then hung to dry near the fire. And sometimes it was just spit. Yep, a quick palm wipe and call it a day. Feet, lower priority. Washed only after long rides or if you stepped in something particularly unspeakable. Armpits rinsed on special occasions or when water was plentiful. The rest of your body treated with patience or simply ignored. There's even a theory, half supported, half folklore, that people judged your respect for tradition by how you washed. Waste water from a face washing, not to be poured out randomly. It was to be disposed of respectfully away from sleeping areas, away from sacred spots. Some poured it eastward toward the rising sun. Some buried it, because even the act of using water had to be deliberate. And here's a strange, quirky little practice. In extremely dry times, people cleaned their mouths with dried wool. Not brushed, rubbed. Wool cloth stiff from age, or sun used like a dry sponge against the teeth gums and tongue. Not minty fresh, but slightly exfoliating. It was also said to absorb bad breath, which is optimistic, but charming. Tooth cleaning in general wasn't standardized. Some chewed aromatic roots, some used sticks birch twigs when available to scrape plaque. Others simply rinsed their mouths with tea or milk. And in a shocking twist for your modern dentist, sugar wasn't an issue. Dental decay was surprisingly rare due to the low-sugar, high-fat, meat and dairy-heavy diet. Your hand drifts unconsciously to your own mouth. You wonder how your teeth would fare on yak jerky and sour milk alone. You're not sure if you'd be smiling more, or much, much less. One more practical detail: shared water vessels. In many households, a single bucket or skin held the clean water. A ladle was used to scoop from it carefully, no double dipping. You never stuck your fingers in the source. That would ruin everything. Instead, if you needed just a little water for rinsing, you poured from the ladle into your cupped hand or onto a cloth. Always separate. Always respectful. And then, the used water sometimes collected again, especially in winter when fetching more meant braving the wind, the wolves, and your own frozen boots. That gray soapy water might be used to rinse boots, clean a floor mat, or in desperate times to cool down a hot stove. Nothing went to waste. Water in the yurt was almost ceremonial. You didn't splash it, you invoked it. And yet, despite all the scarcity, there was no obsession with being scrubbed spotless. There was no shame in being dusty. What mattered was balance. Don't waste, don't offend, don't harm. And you begin to see the quiet wisdom of it. Your world bathes in excess. Hot showers, bubble baths, scented everything. But here, cleanliness was practical, minimalist, intentional. And somehow, even with a single shared bucket of water and a bit of cloth, people still managed to feel kept. You look over again at the silent figures bundled in fur and felt. Their skin isn't glowing, their hands aren't freshly scrubbed, but they're warm, resting, content. Their hygiene has no sparkle, but it has peace. You let your head fall back onto the mat. If you had just one ladle of water right now, you wouldn't bathe your whole body. You'd wash your face, your hands, and maybe rinse the rim of your cup out of respect, not vanity. And then you'd sleep, knowing that was enough. The yurt groans softly in the night wind, its felt walls shifting ever so slightly as if stretching in its sleep. You're halfway between dreaming and alert, staring up at the wooden ribs overhead. And suddenly, through the smoke-thinned air and wool-filtered silence, your thoughts land on one final hygiene frontier: teeth. You've met the sweat. You've faced the smoke. You've even accepted the buttered hair situation. But now, it's time to bite into the question that's been quietly chewing at you. How did Mongolian nomads take care of their teeth? You sit up slightly, tongue sweeping your own molars, feeling the clean edges from your last brush back home. Now try to picture doing that with a stick, or a bone, because that's exactly what might have happened. Let's start with a basic fact. Toothbrushes, as we know them, didn't exist on the steppe. No bristles, no mint paste, no over-promising dental commercials. But oral hygiene wasn't ignored. It just looked different. The most common method: chewing sticks. Small twigs, often from birch, juniper, or aromatic shrubs, whittled at the end to a frayed edge. Chewed gently, they worked as both brush and floss, cleaning the gaps and scouring away food residue. Sometimes those sticks were rubbed with ash. Yes, ash again. The same fine powder used on hands and faces found its way into mouths, partly for cleaning, partly for breath control. It wasn't delicious, but it was slightly alkaline, meaning it may have helped neutralize acids. Primitive science. Accidental wisdom. Historians still argue whether these methods actually prevented decay, or if the low-carb, low-sugar diet was doing most of the heavy lifting. After all, Mongolian nomads ate a lot of meat, fat, and dairy, but not much in the way of sweet, sticky things. That's a win for the enamel. You rub your jaw absently, thinking about the diet. No candy, no soda, no raisins hiding in your trail mix. Just milk curds, dried meat, and maybe a fermented milk drink that doubled as breath freshener or punishment depending on the batch. Speaking of fermented dairy, some nomads reportedly used sour milk arag as a mouth rinse. It sounds horrifying, but if you think about it, it's kind of brilliant. Full of lactic acid packed with probiotics and slightly fizzy, it may have offered both microbial defense and a gentle cleanse. Not exactly mouthwash, but not. You imagine swirling a warm mouthful of fizzy milk around your teeth after a long ride through dusty plains. Effective, maybe. Enjoyable, not remotely. But that's never been the point here. You reach for your canteen instinctively, then remember where you are. No bottled water, no mint gum. Just whatever's left in the kettle, which smells faintly like boiled leather and herbs. Another strange tool: bones. Some accounts mention the use of thin animal bones or carved horn slivers as scrapers. These weren't mass-produced. They were personal handmade, shaped by habit, used to remove buildup on teeth or massage the gums. You wince slightly, but it's not that far off from a toothpick. Just medieval. And let's not forget floss, or rather, the absence of floss. Instead, nomads used whatever was on hand, literally. Fine horsehair, bits of sinew, even twisted grass fibers. If something was stuck between your teeth, you found a way to get it out. Not for vanity, for survival. A mouth infection in the middle of nowhere. That's not a dental issue. That's a crisis. But perhaps the most intriguing part of step oral hygiene isn't the tools, it's the outcomes. Anthropologists studying Mongolian remains from centuries past have often found teeth that were worn down, yes, but rarely rotten. Flattened molars, tight jawlines, enamel that bore the signs of a hard-chewed life, but not one riddled with cavities. And when you think about it, that makes sense. Hard food, minimal sugar, no snacking, and a culture that didn't overprocess what went into the mouth in the first place. And here's a quirky cultural note. Bad breath wasn't demonized the way it is today. If your mouth smelled like sour milk and smoked lamb, that was life. Normal. In fact, breath wasn't something people commented on at all unless it was shockingly foul, and even then they'd probably blame spirits, not gum disease. In some tribes, breath was seen as a kind of spiritual output, your inner energy made visible, or rather, smellable. If you had strong breath, it meant your body was alive, your inner fire still burning. Only the very sick had no scent at all. A breathless body, that was something to worry about. You glance across the room again. A child stirs and turns over a scrap of cloth still clutched near their mouth. Maybe it was dipped in tea. Maybe it was sucked on for comfort. Oral rituals don't always have to make sense. They just have to work. You wonder what your dentist would say if you told them you spent the night brushing your teeth with tree bark and polishing your gums with fermented milk. They'd either cry or take notes. You lie back again and open your mouth slightly to the cool air, tasting smoke wool and that ever-present low hum of history clinging to your tongue. It's not minty, but it feels right. Because oral care here wasn't about polish. It was about maintenance, about grit, about the simple, unpretentious belief that your body would hold if you treated it like part of the land. Hard, useful, enduring, and honestly, you haven't thought about your electric toothbrush in hours. You're barely awake and yet somehow even more aware of your skin, your breath, the weight of your clothes, of how everything in this place is saturated not just with smell, but with life. That's when something rustles behind you. Not a blanket, not a person, an animal. You blink. Slowly, carefully. There's a dog curled at the foot of the stove. Not a house pet, not in the modern sense, but a half-feral guardian snoring softly with one paw over its nose. And somewhere near the entrance, you hear the faint clop of hooves goats shifting in their sleep just outside the threshold. Of course. Because the Mongolian yurt isn't just for people. It's for animals, too. This is the realm of animals in the yurt always. And it turns the entire concept of cleanliness into a flexible suggestion. You look around again with new eyes. The saddle near your mat still warm from use. The rough, woven rug beneath your feet, probably shared with a calf or a lamb not too long ago. A pile of straw near the door, bedding for everyone. It wasn't that animals occasionally came into the yurt. It's that they never really left. Historians still argue whether this close relationship between people and animals was primarily about warmth, companionship, or survival. But let's be real, it was all three. The yurt was not a sealed human space. It was a shared biome, a multi-species apartment. A co-living situation between shepherd and sheep. You think of the logistics. On freezing nights, newborn goats might be brought in to avoid death by exposure. Dogs stayed close not just for heat, but to protect the family. Chickens, less common indoors, but sometimes snuck inside during storms. And horses, too big, yes. But their saddles, bridles, and feed were part of the indoor ecosystem. The animal didn't need to come in, its presence already had. And what do animals bring with them? Hair, mud, saliva, fleas, manure particles, smells that defy metaphor, all of which became ambient, norma. You take a deep breath. It doesn't smell like petting zoo. It smells like lived-in stability, musky warm, vaguely sweet, wool-rich, slightly barnish, but not offensive. And that's because there's a kind of equilibrium here, a biological truce. People didn't try to keep the yurt animal-free. They made the animals part of it. That meant rituals, rhythms, and responsibilities designed to manage, not eliminate the mess. Morning routines involved sweeping out loose hairs with bundles of straw. Blankets were shaken outside, rugs were hung and beaten with sticks, not daily, but frequently enough. And sometimes after the animals had been in too long, the yurt was aired out. Completely. Doors opened wide, smoke-stoked high-felt walls peeled back like citrus rind. One quirky detail. There were designated clean zones inside the yurt, not like your no-shoe policy back home, but similar in spirit. The family altar corner was always kept clear. Beds and sleeping areas were raised slightly or placed over thicker layers of felt, and boots were never ever tossed near food prep zones, except when they were, because sometimes a storm rolled in, or a goat gave birth too early, or the fire wouldn't catch. And then all bets were off. Your host shifts in their sleep, pulling a fur closer. The dog lifts its head, glances at you, then flops back down with a huff. You're clearly no threat. You wonder what it would feel like to share space with animals every day of your life, to let their warmth become your insulation, their scent your environment. You think of your own house. Your dog has a bed, your cat has a scratching post, your kitchen has child-proof locks. But here, it's one space. Shared, simple, real. Even the language reflects it. There's no term in traditional Mongolian that equates to pet. Animals were companions, yes, but also tools, partners, extensions of the household. You didn't own them so much as coexist. And that changes everything about how you view hygiene. A floor covered in fur, that's just extra insulation. A blanket that smells like goat, that's the smell of survival. A bowl shared with a dog, not ideal, but better than frostbite. Modern hygiene separates, sterilizes, draws hard lines between clean and dirty. But nomadic hygiene absorbs. It accepts the presence of mess and manages it with grace, routine, and ritual. You run a hand across the rug. It's rough, threadbare, speckled with something that could be straw or, you know what, let's just say straw. But it's warm, and that warmth matters more than any antiseptic spray ever could. And yes, there were downsides. Fleas happened. So did parasites, infections, sickness. People didn't romanticize it. They accepted it. They built wisdom around it. Herbal powders rubbed on bedding. Smoke waved under saddles. Ash dusted onto sleeping mats to absorb oils and kill larvae. Gross, sure. Genius. Also, yes. There's even a story, half legend, of a herder whose goat kept sneaking into the yurt and sleeping beside the fire. Rather than chase it out, they built a small corner bed for it. The goat kept the fire company, they said. Years later, that goat's descendants still return to the yurt every winter. Uninvited. Unbothered. You smile. That's the kind of cleanliness you're starting to understand. Not about denial. About coexistence. You close your eyes again, the fire sighing gently beside you, the dog twitching in a half-dream of imagined rabbits. You're surrounded by animals, by warmth, by something older than convenience. You are not in a clean room. You are in a kept room, a space that breathes, accepts, sustains. And somehow, despite the hair, the smell, the proximity of so many tiny hooves, you've never felt more at peace. The rhythm of the yurt has softened into something like silence. Not complete stillness, there's always something, a rustle of fur, a crackle of ember, the soft exhale of a sleeping goat just outside. But now it's gentle, worn in the kind of hush that happens when everything's finally done for the day. And that's exactly where your thoughts go, the big moments. Because even if daily life in a Mongolian yurt involved compromise and cohabitation with smoking goats, what happened when something major took place? A birth, a death, a ritual that couldn't be postponed just because someone hadn't rinsed their armpits in 3 months. Tonight, you wander into the quieter corners of nomadic life, birth, death, and body odor. The unscented backdrop to life's most intense transitions start with birth. In many ways, childbirth in a yurt was like everything else, intimate, immediate, and very, very practical. There was no labor and delivery wing, no sterile gloves, no machine to beep softly in the background. Just felt walls, hot tea-sharp instincts, and a corner cleared with care. When a woman gave birth, the yurt's structure often remained unchanged, but the space did. The birthing mother would typically be moved to the eastern side of the yurt, near the hearth, but not too close. The floor was padded with additional felt or straw, and herbal smoke was often added to the fire part blessing part. Fumigation. The tools, cloth strips, boiled water if it could be spared, dried herbs tucked into corners or burned beneath the stove. And the midwife. Usually a senior woman from the clan experienced calm and not squeamish around blood screams or goats who refused to leave. Cleanliness here didn't mean sterile. It meant ordered, controlled. Scent, oddly enough, played a role. A mother who smelled wrong might be considered at risk. Pale sweat, sour breath, or cold skin could signal illness. So others in the yurt would quietly monitor not just her breathing but her aroma. Subtle diagnostics. Historians still debate whether certain smells were interpreted medically, spiritually, or symbolically. Was the scent of burning hair truly bad luck? Did sour milk breath mean the baby would cry often? Or were these just ways of giving meaning to moments too large for words? Whatever the reason, the birth ritual usually included a final act, smoking the space. After delivery, the stove was fed a fresh bundle of herbs or dung. The smoke filled the room. It sealed the event, cleared the energy, and reminded everyone something new had entered this world. Time to reset. You shift slightly. Your mat creaks. You wonder how many new lives first blinked into this same firelight, breathing the same smoke wrapped in the same slightly musky wool. Then you think of the other end. Death in the yurt wasn't avoided, but it wasn't exactly welcomed either. The presence of a corpse was considered spiritually potent, sometimes dangerous. In some regions, a person who was close to death would be moved outside the yurt into a nearby tent or shelter, or even onto the open steppe, depending on the season. The idea wasn't cruel, it was protective. The soul's transition was seen as volatile, and more practically so was decomposition. If someone died inside the yurt, the stove was immediately extinguished. The felt flaps were opened. Smoke was burned, not to warm, but to cleanse. The body was wrapped tightly, often in their own garments, with herbs packed beneath the arms and around the face. Not embalming, just containment, aromatic courtesy. Sometimes family members would rub their own hands or faces with ash, afterward not just in mourning but as a way to remove the spiritual scent of death. A symbolic deodorizing. One strange, striking detail. In certain traditions, if the person who died was elderly or revered, their spot in the yurt would be left empty for a time. Not cleaned, not replaced, just left. A silent acknowledgement, a lingering scent, an invisible echo. And then there were the in-betweens rituals that marked puberty, marriage, first herding trips. These events also had their own scent signatures. Certain herbs were burned. Certain clothes, especially new ones, were aired out near the fire until the smoke had properly seasoned them. Because nothing could be worn freshly made. That was bad luck. Too raw. You had to live in the scent first. Even marriage had an olfactory dance. Gifts were often wrapped in layers of smoked cloth. Brides might be anointed with oils, fat mixed with flower resin if available. A faint scent of butter and something green. The smell of commitment. You smile slightly at that. Imagine standing before your in-laws drenched in yak butter and sage. No perfume, just purpose. In this world, body odor wasn't an embarrassment, it was a context. A marker of status effort, age and role. Children smelled like milk and wool. Herders smelled like wind and sweat. Elders smelled like fire grease and memory. If someone entered the yurt and didn't smell like anything, that was cause for concern. You exhale slowly. You're beginning to understand that this wasn't poor hygiene. It was intentional aroma management, a blend of ritual practicality and centuries-old adaptation. So yes, birth, death, and every milestone in between had a scent profile. And the yurt, it remembered them all. You press your head back to the mat. The fur is warm, the air is heavy with breath and memory. You wonder what this space will smell like tomorrow. A little more like you, maybe. And that somehow feels right. The fire is barely aglow now, a quiet hush in the heart of the yurt. You lie still, wrapped in felt and smoke. Your limbs softened by warmth, your thoughts slowed to a drifting crawl. You've come a long way through sweat milk, ash, butter smoke, and a surprising number of goat-related facts. You know things now. Things you never asked to know about hygiene in a place that never had a faucet. And still, you're not quite ready to leave. Because now comes the last question. What traces of this world remain? This is the gentle path into the legacy of yurt hygiene today. What stayed, what changed, and how centuries of odor management still linger in the folds of modern Mongolia. Let's begin outside the city. Out on the plains in the broad, flat sweep of land where wind still tells time better than clocks, there are still yurts. Lots of them. Real ones, felt-covered, wood-framed smoke hole in the ceiling yurts, and many of them still burn dung. Still wear fur-lined deals. Still operate without plumbing. Because for thousands of nomads, this isn't the past. It's home, and the hygiene practices. Surprisingly consistent. Water is still conserved. Bathing is still seasonal. Hands and faces are still wiped clean with cloths dipped in warmed tea. And smoke is still the most faithful cleanser. Not everyone uses ash and milk as a daily scrub anymore, but many elders still swear by it. Some young herders even post TikToks about it now, holding up a bowl of gray liquid and saying, "My grandma says this keeps her skin young." And who's arguing? She looks great. Historians still argue whether these traditions will survive modern pressure. Urbanization, tourism, modernization. But for now, they hold strong. Because for many, there's pride in the system. It works. Even in Ulaanbaatar, the capital city, you'll find urban ger districts, neighborhoods where yurts sit among cement and telephone poles. Smoke winding through the air alongside car exhaust. Families in these neighborhoods often have access to running water but still follow traditional habits. Weekly bathhouse trips, shared water use, a deep respect for resources. And even when people do modernize, install solar panels, buy bottled shampoo, watch YouTube tutorials on skincare, they still carry the rhythm of what came before. One fringe example, a growing number of Mongolian skincare brands now market products based on traditional ingredients. Sheep's milk cleansers, juniper-infused toners, felt-wrapped soaps, all branded in sleek modern packaging but whispering something old. Something from the yurt. You imagine one of those bottles sitting on a bathroom shelf next to a smartphone and a Bluetooth speaker, and yet its roots reach back to a goat chewing its cud beside a dung fire. The knowledge didn't vanish. It just adapted. And in the countryside, among the true nomads, those who still pack up their gears, herd their animals, chase the wind, the traditions remain untouched. Not as a performance, as life. You see it in how clothes are aired out rather than washed, how blankets are beaten with sticks and left to the wind, how armpits are wiped, not soaked, how breath is judged by effort, not flavor, how hair is still braided thick-scented with herbs or oil and never scrubbed out of vanity, only purpose. And you see it in the spaces themselves. Step inside a yurt today, and you'll still feel the flow, the placement of guests, the crackle of fire, the faint aroma of milk, tea leather, wood smoke, and wool. Not the smell of neglect, the smell of rhythm. One foreign visitor recently wrote, "I didn't smell anything foul in the yurt, just life." Compressed into a room with a smoke hole. You smile at that. You think about your own routines, the sterilizing soap, the citrus sprays, the 5-step evening face ritual. You'll return to them. Probably. But maybe not all at once. Maybe not with the same urgency, because now you know there are other ways to stay clean. Ways that involve air and fire and rhythm and patience. Ways that prioritize warmth over shine, effort over image, endurance over polish. And you've learned that clean doesn't have to mean scrubbed. It can also mean balanced, kept, known. You close your eyes, your limbs heavy in a way that feels safe. The air is still thick with the memory of smoke. Your breath is slow, unhurried, because the yurt doesn't demand speed. It just holds you, and in doing so, it teaches you. So now as we reach the final flicker of tonight's journey, the yurt falls completely still. The stove gives off only a faint red blush. The felt walls sigh with the weight of warmth. The dog by your feet has stopped dreaming. Even the goats outside seem to be breathing slower, gentler. You don't need to move. You don't need to think. Just let the silence stretch around you like another blanket. Feel how heavy your arms are now. How loose your jaw has become. Your eyelids drift lower, not forced, not tugged, just ready. The air is cool against your face, and even though it carries smoke and dust and wool, it feels cleaner than anything you've breathed all week. Cleaner not because it's filtered, but because it's familiar. Lived in. Honest. Out on the plains, the stars are still watching. The wind is still whispering across the grass. The yurt stands unmoved in its eternal position, facing south, holding stories in its seams, breathing through its roof, and keeping one more traveler warm. You may not smell like a field of wildflowers when you wake up, but you'll wake up with history in your hair, and that's something. So let your thoughts loosen now. Let the day dissolve. Let your breath fall into the rhythm of the jeer, the rhythm of warmth and weight and wool. And sleep. Sleep deeply. Sleep as though your body too has been smoked and softened and made whole again by time. Good night.